Thank you. Good afternoon. Hopefully you're all here for my talk. 50 million downloads and all I got was malware. Yep, marvellous. Okay, so no one left the room. It's always a good start. Okay, so just a quick typical about me. So my name's Andrew Pannell. People call me Andy, amongst other things at work. I work as a penetration tester, hacker, bit of red team, depending on what you call it. And I work for a company called Pentest Limited. So we're based here in Manchester, but I actually work in an office down in London. And I'd probably describe myself as a bit of an avid Android user. I've used it since 2008. I actually queued up, like the Apple fanboys do. I queued up in Newcastle in 2008 to get the first HTC phone, the first Android phone, G1. Don't know if anyone else had one, but it was pretty awful. To the point where, as you type commands in, it actually passes that to a terminal, and my friend told me to type rm-rf, and my phone shut down. Okay. So, I don't recognise many of your faces, and you probably don't recognise mine, but you may recognise my name. So I started this work that I'm going to be talking about today about 6 months ago. I started a research piece on a application called Flash Keyboard, and it started getting picked up. So it got picked up first by a website called Softpedia, and then the next day it was the most read article on the register, and it landed there for about 2 days. And then about a week later I spoke to the BBC, and I was on BBC Click, worldwide service, talking about this exact piece of research which I'm going to be sharing with you guys today. So I'm going to be talking about an application called Flash Keyboard, and the whole point of Android is that you can customize a keyboard. I don't know if anyone has ever had installed Flash Keyboard. No? Okay, cool. Again, a good start. So you start by, on Android, from the kind of inception of Android, you've been able to put custom keyboards on there, whether you want a custom coloured keyboard or whether you want a better prediction engine. And I think Apple have kind of started to adopt this approach, but it's always been native Android for almost from the very start. And essentially, it's just to make the user experience a little bit better, a little bit nicer, and change the way that you're using your device. So as I was going to go through and preparing this talk, the first thing I thought is I'll show you the description from Google Play when you download Flash Keyboard. And I don't expect you to read all of it, but there's a couple of funny points that certainly interested me. So the first thing is that Flash Keyboard values your privacy, and they don't collect any of your personal data without your explicit permission. And whilst I'm talking, I want to kind of get that to have it in the back of your head. The other thing that they mentioned, which I thought was quite funny, is that rest assured you can use Flash Keyboard safely. And that little smiley face at the end made me think, are they being sarcastic, or is that is that some kind of weird sense of irony that's going on? So just to kind of give you guys an idea, if you've not seen Android and Flash Keyboard, the idea is that you kind of customize a keyboard, so you can have a pretty daffodil or whatever kind of flower that is. You can have an England flag to show your nationalism. Or like the internet, you can also have a picture of a cat, because everyone loves cats, right? So I got started by looking at Flash Keyboard. I got using the same normal keyboard that came with Android. I got a bit bored of it. It was a bit laggy. I thought I want to try something different, something that's going to be a bit quicker, a bit better, and just change the way that I use my device. And I looked through and started searching on the web store. I found that Flash Keyboard was the 11th most downloaded popular app. So it was actually more downloaded than Netflix, Spotify, WhatsApp, and yet I'd never heard of this Flash Keyboard, to the point where it had been installed more than 50 million times, hence the title of my talk. And it was developed by a company called United. So I thought, fine, I'll go ahead and try it. And it started off as just a user thing where I'll just go ahead and try using this new keyboard. So the first thing I did, went to the Google Play Store, just simply typed in Flash Keyboard. Okay. And when you go to find Flash Keyboard, there's a few different examples there. When you go through and click install, the first thing it does is show you the giant list of permissions that are available to you. So fine, go ahead and just run through the permissions like I normally do. Click accept. Everyone's probably done this. Yeah, whatever. Blah 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 blah. Click install. I just want to get on with using the app, downloading my keyboard, or whatever you want to do. And you didn't really think too much of it at the time. And then I started thinking back to, actually, for what this is a keyboard. It shouldn't really need that many permissions. So I started looking back. So if I talk about the way that Android permissions work, I'm going to be talking about Android any versions less than 6.0, which I think is codenamed Marshmallow. And that's generally running on around about 85% of devices, so it's the majority of devices as of this month. Google Dashboard gave me this figure, but I'm pretty sure the NSA can also corroborate this figure as well. And the Android permission system is almost an all or nothing type system. So you install a device, install the application on the device, and prior to Android 6.0, you accept all those permissions, and therefore you install the application, or you deny the permissions and you don't use it at all. So I went through and I started looking through each of the individual permissions that the application is using, and I had a quick look as to why I could figure out why each of the application was using each of the permissions. So the first thing it wants to do is it wants to read your SMS and MMS messages, and I couldn't really figure out why it wanted to do this. It's a keyboard. Why does it want to access this? And even through the course of my research, I couldn't really figure out a genuine reason as to why it needed to do this, and there wasn't really any kind of functionality as to explaining what it was doing with this information. As I go through the list, I noticed it wants to take pictures of take pictures and use your video camera, and that was kind of fine. The images I mentioned earlier of the cat and the England flag, that's because it wants to be able to customize and show a nice little pretty layout for you. It wants to use want to get your approximate GPS location, and that varies depending on whether it's Wi-Fi it's going to be using to get your location, or whether it's the actual GPS hardware. And if it's hardware, it's accurate to around about 1 to 3 meters. Actually, there's something a bit nefarious about what was going on there, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. As I keep going through, it wanted to read my contacts. Again, that was fine. The idea of it was a prediction engine, and if I'm texting John quite a lot, it wants to learn the word John. I forgot someone with a nickname. It wants to learn that nickname so that it can insert it every time I try and predict. And as I go on, you see there's more and more permissions. So it wanted to be able to read your SD card, and again, I couldn't really figure out why it wanted to do this. There was no kind of reference in the code ever actually accessing your SD card. And during my research, I never kind of got understanding as to why. Maybe it's that if you've got photographs on your device and you want to be able to use that as your keyboard background, but that was never used. I wanted to disable your lock screen, and again, that was something a bit nefarious, and I'll talk about that a little later on. And you can see, as I'm talking along, there's quite a lot of permission for what is essentially a keyboard application. All I'm supposed to be able to do is just type, just make my life a little bit easier and a little bit prettier. We want to be able to change network connectivity, and again, I couldn't figure out why it wanted to do that. Keep going with permissions. It wanted to download files without notification, and that was a bit strange. So the idea that the application could, on Android, you have a little arrow when you download files, it tells you that the files are downloading. It wants to do that in the background, and that could be something I'll talk about later on. You want to access your Bluetooth settings, and again, a big red cross. I'll come to that later on. And again, more and more permissions. It wanted to close other applications. I couldn't figure out why. Maybe it wants to close antivirus. It was never actually used during my research, but it could be something that's interesting. It wanted to draw other applications. Again, I couldn't figure out why. This isn't a permission that's needed for any other third-party keyboard. It wanted to modify system settings. Again, something quite important, and that's something, again, I'll come on to later on. So I appreciate I've done quite a lot of teasing as to what the application does. So the first thing I did is I'll look at, compare this to the Google stock keyboard or the stock keyboard that got come from Android against a Flash keyboard. So just going through the permissions, the stock keyboard asks for 15 permissions, which, that's about normal for any kind of app. Flash keyboard, 49. 3 times as many permissions for essentially what is the same job. So I thought, I'll go ahead and have investigate this a little bit more. I don't want to install this. I'll start doing my day job on this app. So the first thing I did is I'll set up a proxy. I'll have a look at the traffic that's going on. So get my phone, stick Burp Suite in the middle, and then out onto the internet. I mean, it just allows me to look at the traffic that the keyboard's sending in clear text, or add a certificate on there to be able to decrypt any kind of SSL traffic. And this is what I got. This weird binary nonsense, basically. I couldn't figure out what it was. I tried to carve out a few different file formats. Nothing worked. But one interesting thing is the TalkingData.net website. That's a Chinese analytics company, so that got me interested as to what was going on, and I'll come back to that later on. So one of the benefits about working with Android apps is it's pretty trivial to reverse engineer applications. This file is essentially downloaded onto your device part, compiled, and the device goes to compile it onto your specific hardware. So I thought, fine, I can reverse engineer the application back to source code. It's not, which isn't quite true. So what happens when you reverse engineer an Android application? It's a bit like going from English to French. So you might start off with saying, I'm talking about the Flash keyboard app. which translates into French, as I'm not going to try saying because I don't speak French. But you kind of get back, I speak of the application of Flash Keyboard, and the meaning and the intent is, kind of the same. It's not quite the same thing as the source code, but you kind of get an idea what the developer was trying to do. So fine. I reverse engineered the Android application for Flash Keyboard, and I started looking through the modules. And this is what I got. So it actually gives me a hint straight away that it's using gzip to decrypt the data. So that's fine. I can use gzip. I can carve out that file, that binary data I mentioned earlier. I can actually see exactly what format they're using. The other thing is that is interesting is that they've hard-coded a couple of details. So they've hard-coded the IP address. And bearing in mind that this application's got 50 million downloads, they're obviously knowing that they're going to be able to process 50 million pieces of data at least. That's one per user, and therefore that's some hell of a backend they've got for all this data that's being processed. And there's the hard-coded IP, and there's the hard-coded URL. So fine, I can carve out the data that is being sent from the gzip format. I can pull it out and actually have a look at what data is being sent. So the first thing it's doing is it's pulling through my device manufacturer model. It's not that critical, but it's interesting as this is all being sent over the air to China. Second thing it's sending out is my IMEI, which is specific to my device. So it's not quite personal identifiable information. It doesn't identify me, but it certainly identifies my device. But what is interesting is it sends out my email address. So I don't know about you, but I have my first name surname at my work. So if I'm using a corporate phone, it comes through on that. And yeah, so it certainly makes that personal identifiable information. It's identifying me and sending that across to China. It also sends out your GPS coordinates. If you get bored, have a look at that location later. But yeah, that's that. And like I mentioned earlier, that's 1 to 3 meters long, 1 to 3 meters of accuracy on Street View. It also pulls out my mobile network, and that's all being transmitted. And then it also pulls out any details of any hotspot, any VPN or proxy I'm using, which initially might not sound that interesting, but you've actually got quite a lot of information about an individual to be able to perform a targeted attack. That's 50 million users' data going to China. So if they say, I want to get hold of, Edward Snowden, Hillary Clinton, they can specifically target that individual. They can pull their GPS location and find out where they are. The other thing I found interesting was that they started sending information about my Wi-Fi access point address. So they sent not only the data I mentioned earlier, but they actually sent them my MAC address of my device, the SID of my access point I was connecting to, and also the MAC address of the Wi-Fi access point I was connecting to. But they also sent it of neighbouring Wi-Fi access points as well. So they're actually scanning using my device to look for nearby access points. They know where they are because they've got my GPS location. I'm not sure about you, but when I go through a pen test, I go through quite a bit of work. I have to make sure I've got authorization. And I'm not sure if this is in breach of Computer Misuse Act in the UK, but they're actively getting information about nearby locations. And when I go on a pen test, I have specific guidelines that I have to follow. So I'm not sure how legally that sits. One other thing I mentioned earlier is it modifies your lock screen. So this is a standard Android lock screen. Tells you the time, tells you if you've got any recent downloads, and it tells you the charging status of the device. What wonderful thing that Flash Keyboard did is it improved it for me and actually made changes to the device. And when I say improved, it definitely didn't improve the application whatsoever. They actually overlaid adverts onto the device. And the only reason I can think that they was doing this was some kind of financial gain. So they could cost them, they've downloaded the application, distributed it for free. It cost them money to make the application. So as soon as anyone clicks on that advert, maybe they're getting a couple of pennies. If that's 50 million people clicking on those adverts a few times a day, that's quite a few pennies. So just to kind of recap what we know about the device, or about Flash Keyboard rather. So we know it's been installed by 50 million users on several devices. As we confirmed earlier. We know it takes all of our personal data and sends it across to an analytics server in China. It transmits that data over HTTP, so the IP address, the URL I mentioned earlier, doesn't actually encode that information, so it sends it in the clear. So if you're a Wi-Fi hotspot Wi-Fi access point like a coffee shop, That's pretty trivial for someone to man in and build and take all your personal data. And it inserts adverts onto your device. So when I was thinking about preparing this talk, I looked at there's the advert, sorry. I thought about the definition of malware. And I found this from Wikipedia, probably not the best place. But they defined it as malware, short for malicious software, is any software used to disrupt computer operations, gather sensitive information, gain access to private systems, or display unwanted advertising. And we've got 2 out of 4 there. We've got the gathering sensitive information, so it's pulling all of my information, and then it's also displaying unwanted advertising. So I can pretty sure we say that that application Flash Keyboard is malware. So what do you do with malware? The first thing I thought, right, okay, I've installed it, I've now used it, I need to uninstall it straight away. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite that simple. I went to uninstall the application. I'm sorry, I can't do that. So I had a look as to why. When you install Android applications, you simply press uninstall, you get a little warning screen, and it processes through. And I'll enlarge that picture for you. It says can't uninstall this package because the package is an active device administrator. They've actually privilege escalated. They've gone from a standard Android application, and they've granted themselves admin access to your device, so they have access to all your other applications. And this does have a genuine use case. So if you've got a corporate device, you want to set a password policy on the device, you want to set a lock screen, you want to make sure that people only uninstall certain things. You don't want people to just be going, nah, it's fine, I can just uninstall that and get around it. But what also I did mention earlier, it allows that for silent updates. So in theory, although the application didn't do this, and I'm not suggesting that they could, or they did rather, but what they could do is allow a malicious update which then puts ransomware on your lock screen, because they've got the ability to lock your screen, to change your password, and say, actually, unless you pay us some money, we won't unlock your device. So who knows what the next update could do. And I figured out that that was the system permission earlier that allows it to change lock screen, and that's the only thing that it had the admin access had been granted, but it does make it inevitably harder to want to install. So when I started this research out in February, so I thought, okay, I work for a reputable company, we'll go ahead and disclose this. So the first thing I did was in February contact the developers, let them know I found a problem, and it was just ignored. No response from the developers. So I went ahead and wrote to Google and said, Google, there's this application on the Play Store. I've not heard from the developers. I've tried multiple times. Can you have a look at this for me? And then the application just disappeared. So I can only assume Google pulled it on the basis that actually it was in breach of the conditions. About a week later, after the application disappeared, I went ahead and disclosed this information to the press, which is the information I mentioned earlier. And then in June, about a week later, the application returned. Yeah, I know. So it returned in 2 fashions. The first thing they did is just change themselves to Flash Keyboard Lite, completely the same code base, just push it out there. The problem with that is if you're a company and you want the idea of a reputation, you lose the 50 million downloads. So they actually did half fix the problem. They took away all the malicious code, but left the permissions. So it would be pretty trivial for them to go ahead and then put them back in, run all the malicious code, ignore Google's protections. So I've just got some things for you to hopefully think about and before you start downloading random Android applications. The first thing is, just because something's popular doesn't always mean it's a good idea. And it's so hard to find a picture where Justin Bieber does not look like Ellen DeGeneres. The next thing is, just because an application is on the Google Play Store does not necessarily mean it's safe and secure. About a couple of weeks ago, I was looking through and found that there was quite a lot of Android applications that disguised to be Pokemon Go, and there was all essentially just bundled malware. So read the permissions. When you install an application from the Play Store, read what it's looking for. Think about the rationale. This is a keyboard. It's only trying to make my life a little bit easier. Why is it getting access to all this information? And think before you click the link. One other thing I would say is that apparently malware does pay. So after I did this research, .c, the company which developed Flash Keyboard, got $45 million in financing from a Chinese bank. I'll let you think about that as much as you want. I'd just like to thank you very much for listening today. I am on Twitter, so yeah, tweet me, use the BSides Manchester Flash Keyboard hashtags, and if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Sure.
Did you know that Flash Keyboard Emojis and More is in the Play Store? And when you click it, it's got 50 million downloads. And under its permissions, it still has quite a lot of them in there.
Yeah, so it still has the permissions. They've just removed the kind of naughty code behind it, but it would be trivial for them to just put that back in. Yeah, they've only really half fixed the issue. Yeah, sorry.
Did you get a response from Google?
No response from Google, no response from the developers. So I can only assume that Google pulled it because of what I told them. There's certain parts of the Google Play conditions where you don't pretend to do something else. So if you're a keyboard app, you don't pretend to add lock screens. You have to clearly define that, and they was in breach of that amongst the other sending data. That's what Google do, not what Flash Keyboard do. They like data, so yeah, I'm assuming that they just pulled it because of what I told them, but they never come back and said, yeah, that's why we've pulled it.